Corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here. Today on the big program, lots to get to, lots to talk about. Little scare at the Capitol today in Washington, D.C., Capitol evacuation. Evidently, a single-engine aircraft got everyone all in a tizzy. Scared. Saw the tweets going out in the evening going, what could it be? I was waiting for, reports of who knows what. Turns out that the Washington Nationals were going to have a parachutist into National Park, and they didn't bother telling anyone. And everyone, all in an uproar, evacuated the Capitol, high alert. And I'm like, what would have happened if they just shut that down? That would have been bad. But nothing. Everything worked. Everyone, did their emergency stuff. It was a kind of a good test. Kind of a good, one of those when you were in school, kind of the fire drill. Kind of a good drill. Is what it was, and there you go. Some good news. Nancy Pelosi had a great tweet, one I liked, quite happy with. She said, our first year working together for workers' rights and good paying union jobs. President Biden, Democratic majorities. And she ticked off a couple things, protected union pensions. The Butch-Lewis Act did get through, help save multi-employer pension funds. That is a great thing, something I was pushing for years. Happy about that. She says they delivered on infrastructure. Yes, $1.2 trillion historic infrastructure bill that's going to put people to work, going to help rebuild our infrastructure, and going to use American products and union labor. Great, great stuff. She goes on to say reversed Republican harm to apprenticeships. Yep, did a lot of good on that front. Also moved us toward a more level playing field for workers. And look, policy-wise, good stuff. And I'm happy about that. I'm thrilled with it. I think it's a good start. It's moving us in that direction. Now, we're in a moment where all we keep hearing about is inflation. We're in a moment where all we keep hearing about is how bad things are. And the reality is, you look at corporate America, it's great for them. And this is one of those moments where I wanted to start today in this world, because we are seeing, across the board, corporate America, best profits in 50 years. The oil companies are seeing their best profits since 1950. They are happy. The shipping companies, the people who bringing stuff across the pond with the boats, massive profits, record profits, CEO pay through the roof, highest ever. We're seeing stock buybacks, we're seeing dividends, we're seeing records on all of that stuff, and yet it's the workers' fault, it's Joe Biden's fault, it's all that stuff. You see the reports. We've got CEOs making in excess of 1,000 times what their employees are making. You think of, the Gap. You think of Mattel, the toy company. You think of Nike. You think of Dick's Sporting Goods, Foot Locker. You go down the list. There's a bunch of them. But it's Joe Biden's fault that inflation's through. It's not the gouging. It's not corporate CEOs pay. No. It's Joe Biden. And, of course, it's those greedy workers. And the weird thing is, I remember, and this is one of those worlds where I think we as Americans, we as working folks, got to wake up to what is. Because if you remember a number of years back, Harvard Business School did a study. And they found that the average American believed that that CEO to worker pay was like 20 to 1. And that's what it used to be back in the 60s. They thought 7 to 1 was about right. But we're at, in a lot of cases, 2, 3, 400, some, like I said, over 1,000, some over 2,000 to 1. And yet, somehow, it's the workers' fault for demanding things. And the reason I bring this up is I point to Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz is back as chief executive at Starbucks. And he had something interesting to say that, again, this is another rich guy talking down to poor working people. So the billionaire Howard Schultz, back new back in his job, talking to a big town hall, says, quote, it doesn't matter what industry, corporations are terrified, he said, terrified of what happens when workers organize. Here's where it gets a little sensitive because I've been coached a little bit. But I do want to talk about something pretty serious. We can't ignore what is happening in this country as it relates to companies throughout the country being assaulted in many ways by the threat of unionization. He said, I can say this two ways. I can say I'm anti-union, or I can say I'm pro-partner and pro-Starbucks. And I'm going, hold on, wait a second. It's not, again, it's not the workers who are pointing out how badly they're being treated by themselves. It's Starbucks who's treating them badly. It's Starbucks who's been diminishing their wages and lowering their hours, and it's the Starbucks management who's been treating them poorly. It's been them doing all this stuff. It's them doing this. Yeah, it's been them doing this. But what I love from Howard Schultz is that he has this, we're going to pit one group against the other, and we're going to create this adversarial relationship. We're going to have one group against the other. I'm going to pay half the working class to murder the other half. Jay Gould. I'm going to pit one group against the other so that I can profit from it. And that's the divide and conquer. Difference is, and this is what's scaring people like Howard Schultz. Amazon, you saw some workers organizing. Starbucks, we're seeing a bunch of them organizing. Apple, first story down in Georgia, beginning to organize. You're finally starting to see low-wage workers saying, you know what, we've had enough of this. Oh, we can be pro-partner and pro-Starbucks and work for poverty wages and deplorable conditions for people who treat us poorly. Oh, gee, thank you. And the thing is it doesn't have to be adversarial. You can be partners. You can be pro-Starbucks. You can be pro-union. You can both coexist and move forward. It doesn't have to be what Howard Schultz is pushing it to be. You can both have the same kind of thoughts in mind, making Starbucks a very good place to work, a very profitable place, so Howard Schultz can stay a billionaire. And oh, by the way, all the workers there can earn a decent living to support their families. The reason I bring this up is today I was looking through some old contracts and some paperwork that I saw online. And one of them came up to an old Anheuser-Busch, August Busch contract from Massachusetts from the late 70s. And one of the things that caught my attention is in 1979, the wage for a warehouse person was $9.25 an hour. $9.25 an hour in 1979. So I went to the inflation calculator over at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and did the little economic wizardry thing. And the little computer thing said in today's dollars, that would be $34.67. So I'm thinking it's warehouse work, kind of like Amazon. Amazon's so proud of the fact that they're paying 15 to 17. I'm going, where's the other half? Where'd the other half of the paycheck go? Well, we know where the other half of the paycheck went. It went to Jeff Bezos. It went to the billionaires who they're at the top. It went to the shareholders who got the stock buybacks and the dividends. It certainly didn't go to the workers. And then I went through some of the other contracts. They got 14 paid holidays. They got election day paid off. They got full health care, no payment out of their pocket, and a full defined benefit pension fund, no money out of their pocket. So we go from that point in 1979, almost $35 an hour with full union health care, defined benefit pension, to today, Amazon paying $15 to $17 an hour. And they're telling me that somehow that's the best we can do. Sorry, not buying it. Not buying it at all. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com, or give us a call, share your thoughts. I want to go to the phones. Give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. We got Kathy on line one. Kathy, how we doing today?
Oh, good. How you doing?
I can't complain. I understand you want to talk about books and banning books. Are we pro or are we anti?
Anti-banning books. But I was watching Randy Rhodes today. I love that woman. And she said they found out with research that the whole thing is a scam, that the guy that the books they want to ban, they want to replace them with books that are published by another company in Virginia and the head of the CEO of the company is Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia.
Does that surprise you at all?
No.
Okay.
I just hope the whole media gets a hold of the story and they make their life a living hell.
Yep. No, what I've been saying from the very beginning, all of these false attacks, whether it's on CRT, whether it's on, oh my gosh, they're teaching bad things in math in Florida, whether it's any of this, whether it's the don't teach my children about people of other thoughts. This is all about it's all about destroying public education so that they can get the dollars. Ultimately, what this is about is their voucher schemes. This is about privatization, the charters doing all that stuff. And more importantly, this is about the quiverful people, the religious extremists who want to homeschool and have taxpayers pay them to homeschool. That's the long-term goal of the extremists on the religious zealotry crowd. They want to be paid to take care of their children. Ultimately, that's the goal. Destroy public education so that they can create even narrower-minded Christian warriors.
I know, but how can they can't call themselves Christians when they think killing people at the Capitol Police and other people for politicians is okay?
Look,
I just don't understand how they can kill people and call themselves Christians.
I don't know how they do a lot of things and call themselves Christians. A little bit later, we're going to talk about what's going on down in Tennessee. I don't know how you can lock people up for being homeless. I don't know how you can literally take food out of the mouths of children. I don't know how you can do any of the things I don't know how you can be Rick Scott and want to destroy Social Security for seniors. I don't know how you can do any of the things they do.
I know. Well, I hope they fry Marjorie Taylor Greene because she's supposed to go to court on Friday. Let's see if she shows up.
Well, the hope is that the hope is the voters throw her out because she's a lunatic.
I know. She's completely wacky. Oh, and I wonder if Trump's buddy that he put in as the head of the IRS covered his ass again this time. He didn't have to pay taxes again.
Yeah. Well, we will see. We will see how that plays out.
I know.
But Kathy, I appreciate the thoughts. As always, great stuff.
Okay.
No, seriously, at the end of this, it always makes me wonder. And the weird thing is back to our CEO thing. The weird thing is some of the people who espouse their religiosity and their hyper Christianity and all that, actually some of the worst employers. Scary, the justification of what they can do in the name of Republican Jesus. Anyway, love to hear your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our Labor History in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. You got a thought, question, comment, something on your mind, give us a call. It's really, it just, wow, makes you crazy. How education has been assaulted in this country. And you wonder, how do we get the people in elected offices who do some of the dumbest things? You go, how'd they get that dumb? For instance, there is a Representative Debbie Lasko, a representative from Arizona. You cannot make this up. She said evidently that in the last 6 months on the Arizona border, they have apprehended, hear me when I say this, they have apprehended 1 billion migrants. 1 billion in 6 months. 1 billion. Yeah, no. No. No, Deb, no. And the thing is, said it with a straight face and didn't even try and walk it back. Very, very bizarre. Let's go to the phones. Alice on line 2. Alice, how are we doing today?
I'm okay.
1 billion, Alice. 1 billion.
Proves my point. None of them know anything. They're all totally ignorant. Willfully ignorant, I might add, also. The reason why I'm calling is, a couple of things. First of all, I seen that the Michigan senator, the Mallory McMorrow, and I thought that was just fantastic what she did. And the second thing I wanted to say was, you have Marjorie Taylor Greene claiming her defense why she cannot be denied being on the ballot. It's unconstitutional. And I thought, lady, they're using the law that's in the Constitution. What part did you miss? Which points out to me that she has no clue what it says other than there's freedom of religion and freedom of speech in there somewhere and a right to bear arms.
There's a lot in there, and the sad reality is you get past the first part of the sentence, they lose interest.
I think you're right. And this, I know millions of others like me, I do not want to fund Christian education for somebody that's got 15 kids. They don't learn anything. They're not going to do us any good. It's just insane. But there you are.
No, there you are.
You have a good evening, Rick.
Thanks so much. But you're right. Here's the scary part in this. And look, I've known people throughout the years who've said this. And this isn't new. The charters, understand, the whole move towards vouchers was a response to desegregation. This was Uncle Milton Friedman's brainchild back in the 50s into the 60s. This isn't new. None of this stuff is new. These are new ways to segregate themselves and segregate their ideology and their belief structure because they want purity in whatever it is that their narrow-minded ideology will bring them. And look, this is where I struggle because, if you create kids who don't know anything, you create vulnerable children. As parents, if you don't prepare them for the world, you're really leaving them in a really vulnerable position. And I think back to when, I went to a college, a very small Midwestern college that had historically been for pastors and preachers. And, the parents went there, years and years ago, and it was a much different place. They then sent their kids, the PKs, the preachers' kids, and it was a much different place than the parents remembered. And the kids came very sheltered and very, very, tightly wound. And early on, you saw them go in some very bad places and do some things that were very destructive to themselves because they weren't prepared. In fact, I remember there was one girl that, ended up attempting to kill herself because, she ended up, going to one of the parties, getting drunk and ended up having sex with somebody. And that was just, oh my God, the end of the world. And no one had prepared her for the possibility that this may happen. And this is a failure of parents. And I hear these people talking about parental rights. And if you're failing to prepare your children for the real world, and I tell my kids this all the time, my job as a parent is not to be, the strict enforcer and to make you do everything I say. My job as a parent is to get you prepared to stand on your own 2 feet and deal with the realities of the world as it comes at you, to make good decisions, to be prepared for what is coming at you, and to be able to make real-time good decisions to not get yourself in trouble and not get yourself, jammed up one way or the other. That's the role of a parent, not to create little ideologues. Look, you pass your values along, you pass your viewpoints along, you try and do the best you can. But this idea that we have to control absolutely everything that they see, hear, and read and control their minds is, well, it's kind of like a kid fetish. It's kind of sick. It's kind of controlling and kind of dangerous. And I worry about the safety of these kids for when they decide that maybe I'm going to be my own person. Maybe I'm going to try and think for myself. And I know, heaven forbid, a kid try and think for themselves. It's just one of these weird spots that we're in, and I'm not quite sure where this lines us up. I'm just not 100% sure. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got a lot to get to today. When we come back, Jared Yates Sexton's going to be here to share some thoughts on, kind of where we're heading as a country. Some of the authoritarian push that we're seeing. I didn't get to the Alex Jones stuff. Evidently filing bankruptcy, possibly going to be seeking immunity from the government. To turn, maybe give some testimony, help tell some stories. Could this be the beginning of the downfall of, all of the Trumpkins and all of the stuff that happened on January 6th? Not 100% sure. But, the reality is, look, when the rats are jumping ship, because you got him coming out, you got Ali Alexander coming out, you've got people who are going and saying, hey, we're going to talk. But he's looking for immunity. Could be interesting. Going to take a quick break right here. On the other side, our good friend Jared Yates Sexton going to share some thoughts on toxic masculinity and tanning the boys. Evidently, Tucker is big on tanning the boys. Back after this with our Brown Boys. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2010. That was the day the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded in the Gulf of Mexico, killing 11 workers and injuring 17 more. The rig experienced an initial blowout, releasing an uncontrollable flow of oil and gas from the well. Hydrocarbons then ignited, causing the explosion and fire. It caused a massive offshore oil spill of over 4 billion barrels and is considered the largest environmental disaster in U.S. history. British Petroleum was the main operator responsible for the well's design. The drilling contractor, Transocean, owned and operated the rig. A handful of smaller companies were also involved. While company and governmental officials initially argued the explosion was unforeseeable and then subsequently blamed each other, there were warning signs in the months leading up to the deadly explosion. Multiple equipment failures, design deficiencies, poor preventative maintenance, bad engineering decisions, and a chase for profits that emphasized low worker injuries at the expense of process safety all combined to create the disaster. As well, regulations and standards enforcement were weak in an almost totally deregulated industry. One phrase used by investigators to characterize the explosion was the normalization of deviance. From workers to managers to executives, none saw the explosion coming. There were dozens of contributing factors, as the Chemical Safety Board investigation noted. They listed 57 key technical, human, and regulatory factors in their 2016 final report. However, engineers had raised concerns about the potential failure of key equipment. Workers were sensitive to the fact that they could be fired for raising safety concerns that delayed drilling. BP was ultimately found responsible and racked up over $70 billion in fines, cleanup, and settlement costs. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Ralph Waldo Emerson told about a guest who came to dinner and spent the entire evening prattling about his own integrity. The louder he talked of his honor, Emerson wrote, the faster we counted our spoons. Today, America has not one but 6 guests in our national home babbling about their integrity. They are the 6 extremist Republican judges who now control our Supreme Court, and it's a bit unsettling to hear them go on and on, almost frantically pleading with us to believe in their judicial impartiality. For example, the court's newest member, Amy Coney Barrett, suddenly blurted out at a public forum in September that, quote, "This court is not comprised of a bunch of partisan hacks." Whoa, better count our spoons. In fact, each of the 6 were installed on the court by right-wing Republicans specifically because they had proven to be devout partisan hacks. Interestingly, Barrett made her unprompted and strained assertion of judicial integrity at the McConnell Center, named for Mitch McConnell, the rabidly partisan GOP senator who pulled a fast one last year, rushing Barrett onto the bench on a party line vote just before the Republicans lost control of the Senate. Indeed, old Mitch himself introduced Barrett at the forum where she gave her "We are not partisan hacks" speech. He grinned proudly at the pure hackery of his partisan protege. This is Jim Hightower saying another hardcore partisan on the court, Sam Alito, whined in October that critics accused the court's GOP majority of being, quote, "a dangerous cabal that resorts to sneaky and improper methods to get its way." Well, golly, Sam, yes, we do think that. Because again and again, you partisans sneak up on the Constitution and we the people to twist the law to fit your political bias and personal whims. If you don't want to be considered political hacks, stop being political hacks.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, gotta love Colorado. Brought us Lauren Boebert. What's not to love about Colorado? Evidently, Colorado State Representative Dave Williams is now suing so that he could be on the ballot as Dave Let's Go Brandon Williams. What the hell is that? You know, and that's one of those things. Hey, I want to be known as. It's like there's an image that I put out on Twitter of the F. Joe Biden flag where they put the American flag over the UNC and they're kneeling in front of it with a couple of strippers with a bunch of kids. And I'm going, yeah, this is family values. These are the people who are angry at black people who won't stand for the national anthem and will kneel for the national anthem. But these people will kneel in front of a profane American flag while strippers are holding it, claiming that their parental rights are being infringed upon. What is going on in this country? And here to help us figure that out, I've asked our good friend Jared Yates Sexton to come talk with us. Jared is one of my favorite people. He's a political analyst, host of the Muckrake podcast, also the book American Rule, how a nation conquered the world but failed its people. Jared, thanks for taking time for us.
You know, Rick, I never knew that this collapse into a dystopia was going to be so bizarre. You know, I just kind of thought it'd be a paint by numbers sort of nightmare, but this is a whole new ballgame, isn't it?
No, it's crazy. I mean, you stop and I saw this picture today online, and I'm going, this is just nuts. I mean, you got this family with a whole bunch of little kids. I mean, these are little kids who are, kneeling down in front of this F. Joe Biden flag with strippers bent over holding it. And I'm going, family, nothing says family values more than obviously this. And they're smiling, giving the finger, and I'm going, am I missing something here? And this is really the fall of our country, the fall of whatever family value there is, or whatever.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Boebert, because I mean, it's like now we've reached the point where our representatives are people who, ran a restaurant where everybody carried guns and got sick because they didn't want to bring in inspectors. I mean, really, it's a laugh a minute, and you have to laugh because otherwise you would cry. This is just nightmarish all the way around, man. And every single day that this goes on, it just grows more and more absurd just by the hour. Yeah,
but here's the screwy thing. If this guy gets this Dave, let's go, Brandon Williams gets this on the ballot, he wins hands down. You just know it. In one of these districts, if he puts that on there are a bunch of dim-witted, puddle-brained flag monkeys who are going to drag their knuckles in there and vote for this guy. You just know it.
I do. And I got to tell you, the whole let's go Brandon thing, let's just be frank about this. It's so stupid. It doesn't even sound like what people think it does. It's just a bunch of people repeating an online meme to one another. And that's the only thing the Republican Party has at this point. They have no agenda, no principles, no goals for the country. All they have is simple, stupid spite at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And it's one of those things where you go, I go, yeah, go Brandon, and take this idiot with you.
I hate it. It makes me mad every time I see it, every time there's a sticker. I mean, I've got one of these flags in my neighborhood, and it's just like, really, this is what we've devolved into. I mean, it's like degeneration right before your eyes.
No, for me, it's who's that comedian? Here's your sign. That's it. Here's your sign. That's it. I mean, these are people who are showing us who they are. So I'm happy. I'm happy they're flying their flag. I'm happy they're showing me who they are, so I can move on and try and figure out how we save people who are actually going to help us move in a positive direction. Now, you had a tweet that caught my attention today that I thought was really kind of important for today. You said, as long as the conditions precipitating this new wave of authoritarianism are not addressed, there's going to be vulnerability to these narratives that you were talking about. The right is aggressively courting lonely and aggrieved men and giving them a moment and a purpose. And I mean, this is their moment. These are guys who are ticked off. Life hasn't turned out the way that they were sold, because we can go through 1,000 reasons why. But the right-wing outrage machine is feeding them the outrage candy and pointing them at gays, at minorities, at women, at everybody but where they should be pointed at, and they're taking their anger out on all of us.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things I found in my research that really just becomes more and more obvious all the time is that these conspiracy theories are just used by the rich and powerful to deflect anger that they rightfully deserve. In all of this, the conditions in the United States of America, and something that you and I have talked about in the past, neoliberalism and hypercapitalism and the Republican Party have just absolutely just hollowed out this country. They've taken away any ability for people to make money or keep ahead or stay out of debt or have anything even nearing what used to be called the American dream. Somebody has to explain that to people. And the only people making that explanation right now, between people actually trying to help it, are these authoritarians who are creating these conspiracy theories about the deep state, about groomers, about QAnon, whatever it is. They are giving an explanation, but it is very purposefully keeping the blame away from the rich and powerful who've created the problem in the first place.
No, I mean, I look at inflation. Inflation is hurting everybody. I should not say everybody. Everybody who punches a clock and works for a living and collects a paycheck. It's hurting everybody who works for a living. The working class is suffering under the inflation. But it ain't Joe Biden. You can slap your cute stickers all over everything that you want. It's not Biden's fault. It's the fault of corporate America, who's taking this as an opportunity to go, hey, We can blame Joe Biden for choosing to raise prices, fatten our bottom line and our paycheck, and blame somebody else for it. This is good old-fashioned American greedy capitalism at its finest. That's it, pure and simple.
That's exactly right, and it couldn't be summed up any better. I just want to say real fast, Rick. I've been around this block a couple times. It's really weird when a Democratic president gets in office, like inflation takes off, and suddenly corporations don't hire people. It's almost like they don't like the possibility that things could possibly ever change or get reined in. And in the midst of all of this, you look at this inflation thing, it is literally nothing but corporate greed and gouging at this point. I mean, the moment that the Ukraine war started, they simply, they were like, let's drag it even further. Let's see how far we can go with this. And it's literally hurting people left and right. But yeah, it's not Biden's fault. It's not the Democratic Party's fault. It's nothing but unabashed greed at this point.
But how do you then get that message out? Because here's the sad reality, and I blame Democrats for this.
Yep.
There are few voices out there saying this message. The right wing has built an incredibly powerful infrastructure. The corporate-controlled media is doing nothing but pounding Biden. There are no positive stories about the good things Biden's done to help working people. At the beginning of the show, I talked about, the Butch-Lewis Act that saved multi-employer pension funds, talked about the infrastructure bill that's going to help rebuild our infrastructure and create good union jobs, talked about saving apprenticeship programs that's going to help workers get the training that they need and good quality jobs out of that. There's a lot of good things that he's done. You don't hear a peep out of anyone about that because our corporate controlled media needs the narrative that things are horrible, the sky is falling, and it's all the Democrats' fault because, well, why?
Well, I'll tell you this. Since the 1950s, particularly with McCarthyism, the Republican Party has absolutely capitalized on nothing more than fear. They've given tax cuts to the wealthy and basically run up one deficit after another and not even holding with their espoused principles. But the Democratic Party is basically lying on the ground in a fetal position at this point. They're so terrified to state anything because they're afraid of being called a wild-eyed leftist. Meanwhile, even the most centrist or right-leaning policy that the Democrats could ever come to, they're then called socialists, then they're then called radicals. It happens regardless of what they do. The problem here is that the Democratic Party is too afraid to stand up and say what they believe in or even give a name to it. And on top of that, they're terrified to start looking towards labor or looking towards people of color. They have to go back to their original base before they move to the right towards Reaganism. But for whatever reason, they're just terrified to do it.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing. I've been saying this for decades. The reality is the kitchen table is where Democrats should live. Making sure that there's food on the table, that kids don't go to bed hungry, making sure that people have a roof over their head, making sure that nobody goes to bed worrying that if they get sick, they're going to be homeless or bankrupt, making sure that seniors don't have to worry about, hey, is Rick Scott going to destroy Social Security and end my retirement? I mean, this is where I think Democrats have to live, and we got to start moving away from all of the outrage that the left gets itself involved in. Look, I'm on the side of equality. I'm on the side of all of the things that are there, but that can't be central to everything that Democrats do. We've got to be the party of bread and butter. You can do both, but you got to be the party that gets out there and fights with workers. You got to be the party that gets out there and walks picket lines and pushes for labor law reform so that everybody has an opportunity to do better. So that, look, my union contract doesn't have anything about race, doesn't have anything about sexual orientation. It says the person doing this job makes this rate, this wage, has this benefit. That's it. That's what we need to be doing.
Well, you're preaching to the choir. And, this is a little bit of hard medicine that people don't like hearing. But in 2016, Donald Trump, and listen, he didn't mean anything that he said, but he went to the left of Hillary Clinton while going to the right of Hillary Clinton because there's a massive, massive space there where people are dying to be talked to about jobs, about having any sort of actual attempt at a life. And Donald Trump just straight up lied to them because nobody was talking to them. That's the issue here, is that the Democratic Party has to talk to people and say, listen, the system is broken. We know why it's broken. We know who's taking advantage of it. And meanwhile, this rhetoric that they're continuing to put out there, it's literally without any sort of meaning. They're participating in a logjam in Washington, D.C. Every agenda that they put forward is completely stalled, and they can't go forward because they don't have something to run on. There's no narrative going into the midterms. They can't say this is about corruption, this is about dark money in politics, this is about corporate money in politics. They refuse to go that route and actually start addressing the issue and talking to people, like you said, in their kitchen table.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've got to absolutely do. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're with Jared Yates Sexton, political analyst, host of the Muckrake podcast. Highly suggest it wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you check out Muckrake podcast. Also his book, American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People. If you got thoughts, questions, comments, you got something for Jared, give us a call, 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. Wanted to get your thoughts on Alex Jones. I'm actually kind of happy to see that he is going down. I think he sees that his life is about ready to be shambles. The story today, he's peddling immunity for testimony kind of deal. Could this be the beginning of the whole ball of wax tumbling in on the January 6th nonsense? I'm curious your thoughts.
Well, first of all, I mean, with Alex Jones, I mean, honest to God, one of the most influential people of the late 20th century, early 21st century. You do not get to this point in American history without someone like Alex Jones spewing his poison out on the airwaves. The idea that he would finally go down is very, very exciting. And I don't know about you, Rick. It's a poetic justice for me, the idea that he would turn on all of these creeps. That is wonderful. That's the finale that this whole thing deserves. But for me, with the January 6th commission, I got to tell you, I'll believe the justice is served when I see it, because this whole thing has just been an absolute catastrophic mess. And the fact that we haven't gotten to the root of who is actually behind this, which again, by the way, is the wealthy donors that fuel the Republican Party, we haven't even addressed that yet. So when we finally get there, I'll throw a party and celebrate. And until then, I'm not going to hold my breath.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the day after it happened, I said, fine, we're going to go get the dupes who went in there and broke stuff. We're going to get the idiot who defecated on the floor. We'll get the person who urinated on the desk. We'll get them. And maybe that's where we'll stop. And maybe we'll go one more level, but we're not going to go get the moneyed interest. And for me, those are the people who, I want the people who paid for the buses. I want the people who funded those groups, the Alex Joneses, the Ali Alexanders, the Oath Keeper groups. I want the money behind those institutions who riled these people up, pointed them in the directions. The people who were saying, yeah, we're going to stack up bodies, where's going to be blood in the streets. I want those people who funded it. And I'm hoping, I'm still hopeful, but I fear it's going to be too late to matter come midterms.
Yeah, I completely agree. Those are the people that need to be spotlit in this. And I got to tell you, in media, the fact that nobody talks about this is the most distressing thing. One article after another. It never mentions that the same people who funded January 6th also funded the Canadian trucker convoy. They also did the reopen, movement or whatever you want to call it. I mean, they push this stuff all the time and they get off scot-free, and they literally are trying to overthrow democracy. So I'm hopeful at some point this gets addressed, but that would get to the actual nut of the problem in all of this. This is the corruption. This is the authoritarianism that's taking over.
No, and I think it's important that, because you've hit on something that's important that I've been talking about for a long time, because these are all the same bad actors. These are the same people who started the think tanks back in the 70s, who have moved right through to these expansive state policy networks and all of these euphemistically named attack groups, like Moms and Puppies and, Freedom this and that. And all of these groups who, they're just organizing good, concerned, grassroots AstroTurf groups to go and for instance, yesterday we had a guy on, my friend Cyril Michaleko, who points out that, in Bucks County, they're recruiting parents to be spies on teachers because, the teacher might say something so that they can have their assault squad go attack the school with lawyers and lawsuits and all kinds of stuff, basically silencing the teachers. They canceled the play Rent. They've been doing the play Rent for decades. But because it might offend one of these crazy Nazi parents, we had to cancel it.
Well, and I'm glad that we brought this up because that's another link in this chain. All of this CRT / groomer accusations in public schools, this is all being funded by the exact same people who funded January 6th, the trucker convoy, who basically every time a Republican is elected president, the Heritage Foundation hands them a guide on how to be president. This is about privatizing public education. It's about getting a bunch of local people terrified, so they'll run for school board, they'll hand it over to corporations and these private interests. It is an ongoing attack on our way of life, and that's legitimate. It's not a conspiracy theory. Like you said, this goes back literally, I believe, to 1971 is when the Powell memo was released. And ever since then, you have had a systematic destruction of not just liberal democracy, but also an attack on the people and their ability to have jobs and care for themselves and live anything of a decent life. Like, this is the untold story in all of this.
Yeah, the treatise to save free enterprise, which means repeal the 20th century and return us to the good old days of the 80s and 90s and not the 1980s and 90s.
That's exactly right. I mean, back in the days where we're begging for porridge. I mean, literally. Because, I mean, you know this as well as I do. If these people didn't have checks on their power, and if we don't fight back against them, we're looking at not just minimum wage going away. We're seeing the 40-hour work week going away. We're going to see the child labor laws repealed. That's where these people want to go. And that's not fear-mongering. That's in their own materials. They want to go back into the era of the robber barons in which children were getting caught in presses left and right. And that's not a joke. That's legitimately what their aims are.
Yep. No, they're very clear. They think Lochner was wrongly decided, and they want to take us back to that era. You are so spot on. But Jared, as always, I appreciate the time. It is fabulous having you here on the show. I look forward to having you back again real soon.
Yeah, look out for that Mom and Puppies Political Action Committee. We got to keep on the lookout for those people.
They're coming for you. They're coming. Good stuff. Thanks so much, Jared. Always great talking with you. Our good friend, Jared Yates Sexton. Make sure you check out his Muckrake podcast. We'll get links out on social media, how you can do that. Also, the book, American Rule, How the Nation Conquered the World and Failed Its People. Quick break. Back with your thoughts. 1-866-416-RICK, 1-866-416-7425. This is The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1853. That was the day that Harriet Tubman led her first trip on the Underground Railroad, the clandestine network that helped enslaved people escape slavery and move north to freedom. One of the most remembered conductors on the railroad, Tubman herself escaped slavery in eastern Maryland. Tubman had been forced to work in the fields, performing back-breaking labor under a brutal overseer. As a girl, Tubman was injured when she was hit in the head by a weight thrown by an overseer. The injury plagued her with headaches and visions that Tubman attributed as signs from God. To escape these harsh conditions, Tubman had to leave her family behind. But she did not forget them. On her first trip to free those enslaved, the group included her sister and 2 children. On subsequent trips, she helped lead her brother and aged parents to freedom. In all, Tubman made 19 trips back to the South. She became known as Moses, leading her people out of bondage. These journeys came at a personal risk for Tubman. Enraged Southerners placed a $40,000 bounty on her head. But Tubman was known to say that she never lost a single passenger. The Civil War did not stop Tubman's bravery. She worked as a cook, a nurse, and even a spy for the Union Army. The renowned abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote a letter for Tubman where he wrote, quote, "The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism." The horrors of the slave labor system ended in the United States because of the courage of those like Harriet Tubman who risked their lives to stand up against injustice. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I tell you, Jarrett's spot on. They do want to do away with minimum wage. They want to do away with all of the labor laws that were passed during the New Deal. Repeal the 20th century. I mean, it's what they want to do. Let's quick go to the phone lines. Got Gary on line one. Gary, how we doing today?
Good. You sound good. I wanted to say, first of all, it's really great. I appreciate having a voice for labor on the radio. And I just wish they had more of you guys on TV sets because they needed to deprogram a lot of these people on the right. So, or in the center, don't know either. But I've jotted down a few things to talk about. One is NAFTA. We were promised cheaper products and stuff. Well, that sure didn't happen with, and then they got their taxes too here. But it didn't happen with automobiles. I remember buying one that was 1 or 2 years old for about $4,000 in the 70s. And it was a little smaller, like I get car. And now they're, 46,000. The smaller ones are somewhat less, but it just didn't work out, and I was against that the first time. I support Clinton, but I'm not on that stuff. Robert Rice left the administration after that, I believe.
Yeah, I'm with you. No, NAFTA was a horrible thing. And look, I blame Clinton for signing NAFTA, but understand, NAFTA was birthed under Ronald Reagan. It was fully negotiated under H.W. Bush.
Yeah.
He signed the first couple rounds of it. And the only credit I give Clinton is he tried to put some toothless labor and environmental standards in it. It was still bad. It was still crap, but it was the direction the whole country was moving, except for those of us in labor who were fighting against it. And it's been proven that we were right. And the crazy little guy with the big ears, if you remember him, Ross Perot, and the giant sucking sound. I'm with you.
I was campaigning for Tom Harkin that year, Wellstone's closest colleague in the Senate, and he didn't have the personality to get anywhere. But I remember Clinton was talking about fair trade, which I didn't like. And then when he got in, he went all the way over to Bush's thing on NAFTA and that. But he did a lot of good too, Clinton, I guess. But
I don't know about that.
Anyways, I got a different thing here. I was watching the mood news on TV last week. They're starting to say we got to do something about climate changes or catastrophes might end our lives and all that. Where were they 30 years ago? They're trying to do something about it, And then the trick is why they do it. Here's Bill Gates pushing nuclear power to fulfill the fossil fuels. So there's always an ulterior motive with that big money.
Nope, you're spot on. You're right. I mean, if we as a country demanded it, we could solve the problem. It's just we've been so badly divided on this that I fear we're going to do nothing until it's too late.
Well, I tell you one thing about that. You were talking about divide and conquer. The rights revolution, women's rights, minority rights, racism stuff, and others too, gay rights, they use that against us, a backlash, and they exploit it to the tilt, And I remember Jay Gould reading that in People's History when he made that statement, and that's what they're doing to us, I think.
Absolutely. You were spot on, Gary. I appreciate the call, man. Great stuff. Call back again soon.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you. Take care.
Thanks so much. No, I mean, they are. It's divide and conquer at its finest. And they are, as the Gould quote goes, they can easily pay half the working class to murder the other half. And this is where we can't allow this. And look, I've said this before. The gay marriage issue, the transgender stuff, the abortion stuff, not my issues. I want to be on the right side of it. I want people to pursue their right, their freedom, their choice, pursue their happiness, get government out of their lives. But ultimately, this has got to be about people being able to support themselves equally. I'm in favor of equal rights for all across the board, and that means everyone. I believe in those words that the founders put on paper, even if they didn't when they wrote it. That's the important part of where we are and where we need to go. Seems simple to me. Thanks for the call, Gary. Good stuff. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Ludlow Massacre. Today, the anniversary, 1914. On this day, 21 people murdered while they were sleeping in tents. That's our labor history. Quick break. Right back after this with the Ludlow Massacre.
I got nowhere to go now. I got no house, I got no nothing.
Catastrophic rains and floods kill hundreds in South Africa.
I'm here today because homegrown biofuels have a role to play right now.
Biden waives summer ban on ethanol to combat high gas prices. Plus, the climate crisis is supercharging hurricane rainfall.
All of those super stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You will never hear a Republican who complains about how much we have to pay for gasoline ever complain about Jared Kushner getting $2 billion in oil profit money from Saudi Arabia.
Well, that's because they don't actually care about gas prices, and they're jealous of Jared. Now, what was that whole thing about $10,000 and Hunter Biden again? This is your Green News Report.
$2 billion in oil profit money from Saudi Arabia.
Okay, Desi Doyen, the climate crisis devastation continues, doesn't it?
Yes, unfortunately it does. Rescue and evacuation operations are underway in Durban, South Africa, after days of torrential rains and floods washed away roads and bridges and destroyed homes and vital infrastructure, killing at least 300 people. Oh. This latest weather disaster comes not long after other parts of southern Africa were devastated by 5 powerful tropical storms in just 6 weeks earlier this year. In a new study out this week, scientists from the World Weather Attribution Project, which analyzes the influence of climate change on extreme weather events, confirmed that climate change made those storms more intense and damaging.
Gosh, I wish we had more studies on all of this.
Climate change also made the record-breaking 2020 Atlantic hurricane season even worse. A new study in Nature Communications finds clear evidence that ocean warming is driving Atlantic hurricanes to produce more rainfall and to become more intense. This was the first study to look at an entire hurricane season rather than just single storms. The researchers found that during the entire record season of 30 named storms, human-caused global warming supercharged hourly rainfall rates in tropical storms and hurricanes by as much as 11%. One researcher warned, quote, "This isn't an end-of-the-century thing that we have to worry about. We actually have to prepare our coastlines for the changes in these storms now."
What, because climate change is happening right now?
Yes, that's exactly what he means. In other news, the spike in U.S. gasoline prices and other fossil fuel commodities, caused in part by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, are a key reason that domestic inflation is rising. To help lower gas prices, the Biden Environmental Protection Agency this week issued a temporary waiver to the Clean Air Act to allow gasoline known as E15, which is blended with 15% ethanol made from corn, to be sold in summer months to increase supply. The administration estimates that will bring down gas prices by about 10 cents per gallon where it is sold. Here's President Biden at an ethanol plant in Iowa.
Your family budget, your ability to fill up your tank, none of it should hinge on whether a dictator declares war and commits genocide half a world away.
Now, it's a win for farm state lawmakers, but the temporary waiver is controversial because burning E15 gas in summer months increases polluting smog, and it could encourage more fossil fuel consumption.
You know what else would help?
What?
Don't we have war profiteering laws on the books anymore? Sure would like to see some of those brought against big oil.
Well, high gas prices have political impacts for congressional Democrats who warn that if Republicans win control of Congress in the November midterm elections, that will effectively mean the end of U.S. climate policy.
Yeah, and maybe the end of democracy, but that's a whole different story.
Another major energy company is moving to exit Russia to stop funding the war on Ukraine.
Rexit?
Bloomberg News reports that Vitol Group, the world's largest independent oil trader, will stop trading Russian crude oil and products as its existing contracts expire by the end of this year and will not enter into any new transactions with Russia.
Good.
Some good news. Japanese car maker Honda announced this week it will try to catch up to other global car makers cars by pouring $40 billion into electrifying its lineup with the target of launching 30 EV models globally by 2030. And finally, the U.S. has hit a wind energy milestone. In the first week of April, wind power was the second largest source of electricity in the United States for the first time ever.
Nice.
That's according to the Federal Energy Information Administration. Wind energy edged out electricity generated by nuclear and coal in the nation's electricity mix, but still trailed behind natural gas.
I didn't even know we had a Federal Energy Information Administration.
And now you know.
For much more on all of those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So on this day, 1914, hired gun thugs for the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company hired strike breakers and soldiers to attack a tent colony in Colorado, killing 21, including 12 children. They hired the National Guard as strike breakers to come in and attack these striking miners and their families. And, this is one of those great moments in labor history, one of the bloodiest massacres in our country's history. One of those things that, sadly, we don't really teach much in our schools often. Something I think important to remember. So when these anniversaries come around, I think it's important to talk about it. That's why I've asked Rosemary Foyer to come talk with us. She's a history professor at Northern Illinois University, also the director of the Mother Jones Heritage Project. She's the editor online there. Also, she's a member of LACHA, the folks who keep labor history alive. Rosemary, thanks for taking time for us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me.
So this is the anniversary of a horrible moment in our country's history, and it's one of those things that I think in this moment where labor organizing is getting some resurgence, where unions are once again at the forefront. I think remembering what past generations had to go through to get respect in the job, to fight for the things that we take for granted, I think is kind of important.
Absolutely. I think on this date, when we remember these children and women that were killed, we have to think of this as a longer war against labor, and we're still suffering the consequences of that in this country. People fought back then just as they're fighting back now, and we should never forget that John D. Rockefeller, wealthy scion of the oil, Mother Jones called him Oily John, testified before Congress just before this. There's all sorts of violence happening in those tent colonies where workers were locked out and they had to go to tents because the company owned the property, and it was like, you go on strike, you're going to be out of a home. But John D. Rockefeller testified just before the massacre. The congressman said, why don't you just recognize them? What's the problem? Is it really worth all the violence that's occurring or that could occur? Are you willing to risk death? And he replied, yes, we think it is worth it. So there is a lot of terrorism in our history that does go unaccounted for. And the stunning thing, at least for me personally, just when I heard this story of these children who were killed, it goes right through you, because we are not used to that notion. Everybody in U.S. history supposedly got along, right? Except for rabble-rousers. But, here's John D. Rockefeller saying, I'd rather risk your death, and This is like a revolutionary moment. We won't allow unions to be formed.
Yeah.
So that is really profound. I think that so much of our history has been hidden, and that there's an attempt to recover it. LACHA and our project just sponsored a program tonight on a new book, and there was new revelations about the Ludlow site that have just come out recently. There's so much still to be learned. We have to remember how much this was covered up at the time, and archaeologists are still uncovering materials around this important event, an event that should never be forgotten.
Yeah, and back in 2013, we made our way down there when we did our labor history tour, and unfortunately, by the time we got there, it was closed, and we could only look at it, from the through the fence, because at the time there was some vandals who had done some damage to it. I guess broke off the arm of one of the off the statue, and
absolutely.
What we learned on that labor history tour back then is that corporate America has done a masterful job of basically either whitewashing labor's history or completely eviscerating it. We went to the site where the Battle of Blair Mountain, that whole area there, and they literally removed the town. There was nothing left. And there were places where we did find history. It was corporatized, and this is what I've found more and more over the years, that we soften this stuff. That was so long ago, we couldn't possibly do that now. But we have crummy CEOs like John Rockefeller today, and I look at just today. I use the comments of Howard Schultz, who said, corporate America is terrified of what happens when workers organize, that they're being assaulted by unions. And I look at Tennessee, where Tennessee's talking about criminalizing people who have to live in a tent. I mean,
Absolutely. I mean, it is. I actually did think a lot about that when he made that comment, right? That this is very similar to Rockefeller. Oh my gosh, these are terror. Labeling unions as, incendiary organizations that are trying to control business is an excuse to attack. And that's always the kind of cycle or circular logic that goes on. With the Ludlow colony, here are immigrants who are struggling for an 8-hour day, something that we all want if we don't enjoy it, or honor if we do, have the weekend, etc. But that was labeled as very threatening. The immigrants never got justice. They were labeled as terrorists, and that labeling them as terrorists or as outside the pale of American experience as foreigners allowed them to kill them, or gave the Guard permission. I just wanted to make a point about the issue of the Guard. By the way, these were hired mercenaries who were really honeycombed through the Guard. So it was the state, it was the power of the state, but it really was Rockefeller's men in that sense, right there. Doing things in West Virginia, they poured kerosene in the milk of children. This was brutal stuff. In Colorado, they ended up, burning the tents, and the idea was nobody's going to believe these immigrants. There's just nothing that we have to worry about. And indeed, the leaders of that colony, of the military, they did have the official military authority. They got away with murder. And it's something we shouldn't forget. No,
absolutely. And it's these lives, these lost lives, that ultimately got us the things that we take for granted today. Like you said, the 8-hour day, child labor laws eventually that came down to the road out of all of this stuff. And, while all this tragedy was happening, eventually something came out of it. But it was these poor souls didn't reap the benefits of it. It was for future generations, for people down the road, right?
And so, and in that respect, this new book is called Communities of Ludlow, profiles the importance of memory, and descendant communities and people. It's our job to keep this alive. And academics, historians, in this case the archaeologists, working with those communities have made a mark, and that memory lives on. One of the things that was discussed was they had to excavate the hole. If you ever go out to Ludlow, you described it, but you can open up. They were so afraid of the death special. That was what they nicknamed. The Baldwin Felts came through the tent colonies and machine gunned it, and their goal was to make the miners mad and get them to engage in violence. So they would do things in the middle of the night, shooting the tents up in the hopes that the next morning the men will be so mad that they'd gun down a Baldwin Felts, or not, they would take on, and then there was the justification of the military full force would be brought about, and the men and women, and the women were very much part and important in this community, refused to take the bait, but so they ended up, in a stalemate there. But it is that community, and the memory of it is still, the knowledge of it is still being found. And one of the things that was uncovered in that hole, which they preserved with cement, but the cement was degrading, so they've recently excavated it. They found a new, a cross that the people who created that cement so that people could go down and imagine what it was like in the under the tents. So the people were, the descendant communities were so moved by finding that large cross that somebody at the time of this great defeat had left there and had never been seen before. Only the people who buried them and made that cement hole would have known about it. The other recovered story is that the woman who was, the whole family was lost, Sita Costi and Charlie Costa, the Costa family, was recently discovered that she did give birth in that hole, probably after death. And that there is another unaccounted. So you mentioned 12, but it really should be 13. Because she was 9 months pregnant, and apparently either in the aftermath of her dying, she gave birth in that hole to a 13th victim, a 13th child.
Yeah.
There was, there's a lot more to this story that can be uncovered, and we have to remember the loss of memories, that people did bury those memories, and it's a long struggle to uncover the full story.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show. We're here with Rosemary Foyer. She's a history professor at Northern Illinois University, also the director of the Mother Jones Heritage Project. You want to check out their website, motherjonesmuseum.org. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. So in looking at this, I mean, when you have these anniversaries and these moments, what are the lessons that we want people to take away from this? I mean, there are a bunch of these horrible tragedies, and where I'm at, Latimer is just a couple of miles up the road, and you hear these milestones come and they go, and we talk about them and we go, oh, that was just the past. What do we want people to know, to remember, to think about as they think about Ludlow?
Well, that's a great question. I think that these are all connected, that the capitalist class really did see them as connected as well at the time, and that in order to redeem the lives of the people who struggled at that time, we have to see ourselves as part of a long thread of history. You mentioned Latimer, which is 1897, and there they gunned down 19 immigrants. It's the same story as Ludlow, and it's very similar to Blair. But in 1900, in the wake of that memory, Mother Jones led a march of women to organize Latimer. That it was recovering the struggle of the march that she was engaged in, and the participation of women. The similar thing, I think, if you tell the full story of Ludlow and Blair, it's these communities of struggle, and that holds a powerful lesson for the present. that the way that they came to struggle, so much so that they freaked out John D. Rockefeller and his minions, is that we are a powerful community, and that overcoming the divisions among us is a very, very important element of that. And so, in respect to freaking out the the current powerful people, there's a powerful lesson in the past.
Yeah, look, I always look at like the Bread and Roses strike. If they can overcome all of the language barriers and all of the ethnic divisions to organize and to have a victorious organizing strike there, we can set aside our differences today to do the same thing. And for me, some of these stories are about taking the lessons and taking the wins and using them to say, look, we're not as disconnected as maybe some in the past, where we can take and move forward and do better and learn from the past and not engage in the same failures.
And I think the other lesson is you'd be surprised who can come out and become leaders out of struggles, that leadership. And Mother Jones said you never lose a strike. Now, I always thought that was just a utopian view. But the more I think about it, what she meant by that is, that it's that struggle and lose, struggle and win. That,
right.
It's not that you go into it without a strategy. That's very important. But that if you never struggle, you will just be servants.
No, you always got to put up a fight, and this is where if you never get involved in the mix, if you never put up that fight, you're always going to lose. And even if you lose a fight, at least you fought. And
right.
For me,
and in the case of Ludlow, John D. Rockefeller had to put on the biggest PR program of the capitalist class, but he also improved working conditions so that they didn't get a union. But that's the other lesson that we need to tell kids. Like, even when they didn't win a union, it improved the conditions. So even then, you can't say the unions weren't involved in it.
Right.
Right? They freaked out, so they made a moderate improvements.
Good stuff. Last question I've got: where can folks get more information if they want?
Well, as you said, we have a regular public history blog on the Labor Online, which is at LACHA. We invite people to join LACHA, and we have teaching units there that we're involved in. And for Mother Jones history, which is really involved in all of these struggles, MotherJonesMuseum.org.
Good stuff. Rosemary, I appreciate you taking time for us. I'd love to have you come back and talk with us again.
Oh, yeah. That'd be great.
Fabulous stuff.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Rosemary Foyer, history professor there at Northern Illinois University. For the websites, check out lawcha.org, LAWCHA.org, also MotherJonesMuseum.org. Good stuff there. Good. Quick break right back after this. If you're just joining us, you've missed any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Share it, especially this one. This is a good interview, a little bit of our labor's history. A little bit more on the other side. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. If you're a fan of the show, you've heard our labor history in 2 segments, and you can hear them on the radio pretty much anywhere in the U.S. Labor history has never been more important than it is right now. So here's what we'd like you to do. Tell a teacher. Tell a teacher that labor history is important and that they can get digestible 2-minute lessons that are absolutely free. Free to download, free to use, free to share. Tell a teacher to go to thericksmithshow.com/history and help us put labor back where it belongs, in the classroom. You know, generations of American workers fought, bled, and died to build the American way of life. It's our job to keep their stories alive. Go tell a teacher that we're here to help them do just that. Find us at thericksmithshow.com/history today.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Yeah, you listen to the story of Ludlow, and it's incredible. I mean, these people were fighting for something that they didn't, they didn't ultimately get to see, but they were doing it for the betterment for their children, for the future, for opportunities that ultimately they didn't get to enjoy. And when you think about the mine wars that went on across this country, whether it was West Virginia, whether it was Tennessee, whether it was Pennsylvania, whether it was Colorado, they were ugly, they were bloody, they were destructive. It was terrible. And ultimately, the John D. Rockefellers, ultimately these robber barons, they knew what they were doing. It was more for them and less for everybody else. That's what they were doing. They knew that. And look, you think about the things that we take for granted. Child labor laws, for instance. The fact that our kids get to go to school. That's a given today. People fought, bled, and died for that. I remember a couple years ago. Well, it's been a long time ago. I used to volunteer as a big brother. And, I had taken the kid that I was a big brother to a mine tour up north, where the mines, up in Lackawanna County, where the mines are. And we went down in this 300 feet down into this mine, and they had it all displayed. They had it set up, where this guy was doing this work and this guy was doing this work. Well, the kid was about 8 years old. And immediately he was drawn to this doll, because they had dolls set up, like not dolls, but, stuffed people. Not, they had like mannequins, like they look like stuffed people. But there was a kid that was his height, looked just like him, all bundled up, and same height, same, looked almost like him. It was kind of eerie, and the guy giving the tour noticed it, and came right over with the whole group and said, and was talking directly to him and said, what are you, like 8? And the kid said, yeah, he's 8. He goes, so was this kid. His name was, they gave the kid a name, and he died on this day. And the kid's eyes got really big. He goes, you see that door? That door killed him. And he went through this story about how this 8-year-old had a life expectancy, like a mortality rate of like 50%. Because what would happen is the first jobs you got in the mine was, making sure that this door was open and closed. They would sit on this stool behind the door because there wasn't much else room. And if you fell asleep, because they would work 10, 12-hour days, that cart would come down, and if you didn't hear it coming to get out of the way, the door would crash, would smash you into the wall. And it was the supervisor's job to come and grab your bloody, broken, dead body, throw it up on the buggy, and take you up to the surface, throw you on the clippity clop horse wagon, and off to where you lived, and then take your lifeless, broken, bloody body and throw it at the door. And the sound of your bones hitting the door was the notice to your family that, hey, you're home. And if you were the breadwinner, that was your eviction notice. And he went into this, and the kid was like, oh my God. And that's what he goes, that's why you got to do good in school. And that was kind of the message. Because people literally fought, bled, and died so people can go to school. There are forces in this country right now who want to take that backwards. And, when we were talking with Jared Yates Sexton a bit ago about, returning to the days of the Lochner era, there are people who want to use the law to return that idea of liberty of contract. That if you're hungry enough, desperate enough, and willing to work for poverty wages in desperate conditions for unlimited hours, well, that's your right. If you're willing to work for $1 an hour, 100 hours a week, no, you don't get minimum wage, you don't get overtime, nothing about safe working conditions, because it's your liberty, it's your freedom. You chose to do it. And this is what they're doing with all this gig economy stuff. This is the misclassification happening. They're not even making legislative changes. They're simply misclassifying people and say, hey, you're your own boss now. They don't even have to worry about it because you're doing it to yourself. It's your liberty, it's your freedom. Because eventually, they're going to start pulling some of this stuff back. And then what happens? Scary times. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Make sure you grab the podcast at the website or wherever you get your podcasts. Quick break, right back after this. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1853. That was the day that Harriet Tubman led her first trip on the Underground Railroad, the clandestine network that helped enslaved people escape slavery and move north to freedom. One of the most remembered conductors on the railroad, Tubman herself escaped slavery in eastern Maryland. Tubman had been forced to work in the fields, performing back-breaking labor under a brutal overseer. As a girl, Tubman was injured when she was hit in the head by a weight thrown by an overseer. The injury plagued her with headaches and visions that Tubman attributed as signs from God. To escape these harsh conditions, Tubman had to leave her family behind. But she did not forget them. On her first trip to free those enslaved, the group included her sister and 2 children. On subsequent trips, she helped lead her brother and aged parents to freedom. In all, Tubman made 19 trips back to the South. She became known as Moses, leading her people out of bondage. These journeys came at a personal risk for Tubman. Enraged Southerners placed a $40,000 bounty on her head. But Tubman was known to say that she never lost a single passenger. The Civil War did not stop Tubman's bravery. She worked as a cook, a nurse, and even a spy for the Union Army. The renowned abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote a letter for Tubman where he wrote, quote, "The midnight sky and the silent stars have been the witnesses of your devotion to freedom and of your heroism." The horrors of the slave labor system ended in the United States because of the courage of those like Harriet Tubman who risked their lives to stand up against injustice. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Ralph Waldo Emerson told about a guest who came to dinner and spent the entire evening prattling about his own integrity. The louder he talked of his honor, Emerson wrote, the faster we counted our spoons. Today, America has not 1 but 6 guests in our national home babbling about their integrity. They are the 6 extremist Republican judges who now control our Supreme Court, and it's a bit unsettling to hear them go on and on, almost frantically pleading with us to believe in their judicial impartiality. For example, the court's newest member, Amy Coney Barrett, suddenly blurted out at a public forum in September that, quote, "This court is not comprised of a bunch of partisan hacks." Whoa, better count our spoons. In fact, each of the 6 were installed on the court by right-wing Republicans specifically because they had proven to be devout partisan hacks. Interestingly, Barrett made her unprompted and strained assertion of judicial integrity at the McConnell Center, named for Mitch McConnell, the rabidly partisan GOP senator who pulled a fast one last year, rushing Barrett onto the bench on a party-line vote just before the Republicans lost control of the Senate. Indeed, old Mitch himself introduced Barrett at the forum where she gave her "We are not partisan hacks" speech. He grinned proudly at the pure hackery of his partisan protege. This is Jim Hightower saying another hardcore partisan on the court, Sam Alito, whined in October that critics accused the court's GOP majority of being, quote, "a dangerous cabal that resorts to sneaky and improper methods to get its way." Well, golly, Sam, yes, we do think that. Because again and again, you partisans sneak up on the Constitution and we the people to twist the law to fit your political bias and personal whims. If you don't want to be considered political hacks, stop being political hacks.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So you may remember yesterday was talking about Tennessee and the legislature there moving a piece of legislation on homelessness. And if you weren't here yesterday, you may think, hey, state legislature did something on homelessness. Great. Finally, we're going to address homelessness in a way that's going to have some dignity and respect for people who are down on their luck. Finally, we're going to live up to our wanting to be that God-fearing Christian nation kind of stuff that they keep throwing at us. And would you be wrong? Evidently, the good folks there in Tennessee, and I use good folks very sarcastically because there's nothing good about this. They have moved through their legislature, and I guess it's headed to the desk of their governor, a rule that says you can't, anyone, camping under a bridge or an overpass or on a shoulder of a state highway or interstate, or you're basically sleeping outside, now going to be a Class C misdemeanor. And if you have the audacity to camp on public grounds, you could face a Class E felony, which could be 6 years in prison and a $3,000 fine. And if that weren't bad enough for the homeless and the unemployed, if you're caught, panhandling and begging for money, soliciting, somewhere on a roadway, a shoulder, a berm, a right-of-way, controlled access, a highway, entrance, any of those places where you see people with their signs, that is going to be a fine of $50, and you're going to be ordered to serve 20 to 40 hours of community service. So you're going to get to do free labor. We're going to take the $50 that you don't have and make you do free work. Gee, I think, if I remember right, Tennessee was one of those states that used to have the convict lease program, where we took freed slaves, put them in jail, and then leased them out to break strikes. I think that used to be Tennessee's history, if my memory serves me, and yes, it does. And here to share some thoughts on this wonderful policy and how Christian this is, again, sarcasm, I've asked Alyssa Hanson to come talk with us. Alyssa is the Communication and Political Director at the Tennessee Afl-Cio Labor Council. Alyssa, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
I hope my sarcasm came across. I hope I'm not propping up the people who have done this horrible thing. Because I got to tell you, I think in the wealthiest country in the nation or in the world, at its wealthiest moment in history, we can do better than this. We should be doing better than this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you hit the nail on the head with the crux of this legislation. I mean, if nothing else, what it does is it criminalizes sleeping on any public property. So, kind of as you touched on, instead of getting these folks, especially homeless folks, Nashville in particular, we've got a big problem with homelessness. I live just east of the city. And instead of focusing on getting these folks the help they need, getting them access to resources that they need, we're focused on criminalizing homelessness. And I mean, I think that just shows again how out of touch the priorities of our legislature, are. I mean, again, we have a Republican supermajority. That's not a secret here. But then when they pass a piece of legislation like this, watching the debate on Monday night and then watching it in the Senate last week when you have a state senator comparing, or bringing up Hitler and saying, well, Hitler was homeless and look what he did in a few years. I mean, when you have that kind of dialogue and you watch what they're saying, I mean, it's just, first of all, it's surreal, and you're thinking, is this actually the state I live in? But it's also just mean-spirited and cold, how they treat constituents other than their favorite ones.
No, and I mean, I'm looking at this, and the Hitler comment, again, our education system failing us. I mean, seriously, if that's what gets elected, please, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board on this elections process, because that's scary stuff. But, for me, as I said, we're the wealthiest country in the world at its wealthiest moment. This just seems mean-spirited. It seems, look, nobody likes to see people who are down on their luck. Makes us feel guilty. I get that. I get you. You feel guilty about seeing that. Maybe you don't want to help them. I get that. But to do this, to punish people, to kick them when they're down, I mean, this is what I have a problem with. Look, maybe you don't want to help, and that's fine. But this just seems to me to be so angry and punitive.
That's sort of the MO. I mean, you're spot on, but that's truly, I think, the MO of the Republican supermajority. The more mean-spirited and the more just cruel and cold-hearted I think that they can be, they want to be. And it's funny because this is also the same group that almost every year they pass a piece of legislation, usually doesn't pass both chambers. That's why it hasn't become law yet. But they try to pass a law, making the Bible the official state book. I mean, they love to talk about God and they love to talk about Christianity, but these same values that they preach, they don't put into practice up there.
Yeah, it's the same with the Constitution. They love having it in their pocket, but they never bother to actually open it up and read it. And I find this with a lot of my fall Christians who, they love to say, the Bible is the best book. And, Donald Trump is the perfect example of that. When asked, it's my favorite book. Did you ever read it? No, not so much. I looked at the pictures. Maybe if we made it a picture book, maybe that would be helpful. But here's the thing. Look, I'm of the mindset that we use policy to make lives better, to find solutions that make problems go away, not create new ones. And this looks like a solution to a problem that is only going to make problems enormously worse. You're going to put people in jail, which is going to cause them to have more problems. You're going to take money from them that they don't have. You're going to clog up a system. I mean, this is just a snowball of horrible instead of dealing with what we know the problems are. And look, for a couple of years, we used to do Hungry for the Homeless food drives where we live out in a parking lot for X amount of days to raise money and food for the homeless shelter and for the food banks. And I got to know a lot of homeless people. And they're not the stereotypical, they're just, drunks and drug addicts. No, these are people, a lot of them suffering from mental illness, a lot of them down on their luck, lost a job, car broke down. Things happen. We should be trying to solve those problems, getting mental health treatment to people, getting access to low-cost loans to help get a car fixed. Do those things. This is just ugliness.
It is. It absolutely is. And I mean, you said it perfectly. We need to be focused on getting these folks, in touch with the help that they need and getting them connected to the resources that they need, not criminalizing them for being homeless. I mean, it's one of those things where when you think the legislature can't stoop any lower, they do. And this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. And instead of, hey, we're going to cheat them out of time. If we catch you panhandling, you're going to have to do community service. How about, here's a shocking idea. How about we get them jobs? How about we have a system that's set up that, I don't know, if the private sector can't or won't create enough jobs for folks, especially people who have struggles, that we make the public sector the employer of last resort, and we get people jobs so that they can support themselves, and we help them along to give them the hand that they need so that they're, not homeless, and they have access to resources. How about we do that instead of this or any of this nonsense?
That's exactly right. I mean, and it's so infuriating to see legislators so focused on either, issues that they know are going to be hot buttons with their party or things like that. I mean, they're not focused on helping any Tennessean, frankly, outside of the ones, that donate a lot of money to their campaigns. I mean, it's the lack of concern and the lack of empathy for their constituents and the problems the Tennesseans are facing. I mean, we lead the country in minimum wage jobs. I could go on and on. I mean, we are a right to work state, so we're not exactly at the top of the list for shining accomplishments. But, if they were actually focused on the real problems that our state's facing, we'd be a lot better off and they'd be a lot more productive.
Yeah, but you do have that senator. What's her name? The one with all the mascara, Marsha Blackburn.
We do.
She wants to create jobs. She wants to build a wall, a big, beautiful wall right on your southern border. And I think I know a lot of people who wouldn't mind if you built it all the way around the state.
Yeah, unfortunately, that kind of sounds about right now. But she also forgets a lot of people in Chattanooga also work in Georgia. So they may have a little trouble, getting back and forth. But she might not have thought out those logistics quite yet.
Well, there is that. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're here with Alyssa Hanson. She's the Communications and Political Director at the Tennessee Afl-Cio, the Labor Council. Make sure you check out their website. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. You said a moment ago that you've got some good labor victories, and across the country we're seeing Starbucks workers, we're seeing Amazon workers, lots of excitement, and I'm thrilled about that. And I know in Knoxville, for instance, you had Starbucks first victory there in Memphis. You had some people fired, so there's some activity going on in a groundswell. Because I think this kind of legislation that we've been talking about, this kind of mean-spirited, hateful stuff, I'm hoping, and you can talk to this, I hope, better than I can, I'm hoping is motivating people to say there's got to be a better way, and we've got to have the jobs that are going to help people lead better lives. At least that's what I'm hoping.
I think so. I think that's spot on. You mentioned the Knoxville Starbucks. That was a huge victory. That was the first Starbucks to officially win recognition in the South. We've actually got one in Rutherford County, which is just southeast of Nashville. They filed to have an election. Actually, here in Nashville, there's a local coffee shop that won their union election a week ago. And they are now the first unionized coffee shop in Nashville, which is really a pretty big accomplishment. So I think folks are really rallying around that. They're seeing just the worker power, that's coming from all different directions of the state. We may be a right to work state in the South, but there's no shortage of worker power and workers rising up and saying, hey, I'm tired of the way I've been treated. I need to earn more money. I deserve better treatment. And I just think that's been really inspiring. And then, of course, a lot of our membership is rallying around the fact that, this November, we have a chance to, we'll be voting, obviously, to keep it out of the Constitution, but voters will decide whether or not to enshrine our state's right to work law in the state Constitution. So, we will be voting against enshrining, low wage jobs and just, at will employment. And, I think that's also been a big rallying cry for our members as well. That, just to kind of say that, hey, this corporate greed and this corporate power is unchecked and it's out of control.
No, the whole no rights at work agenda along with it.
Mm-hmm.
The attacks on everything, not just, your right to join and form a union, but everything that comes along with that and every right that workers have or in many states like yours don't have. And it does. It equates to standard of living. It equates to the world that we now live in. And I talk about this all the time. The fact that, what's happened in this country has been a massive redistribution of wealth from the people who actually show up and do the work to the people the hardest day's work they do is move money from one pocket to the other. And sadly, most of us who punch the clock every week and do the labor, we've been the ones getting screwed.
That's exactly right. Workers are fed up. They're tired of being treated, as basically second class. And just this resurgence of power, like I said, especially in a Southern right to work state like ours, is really inspiring. We may be a smaller labor movement down here, but we're also very mighty at the same time.
So how do we turn that into electoral victories? Because, I keep saying, and this is where my mindset has always been, we've got to get away from these divisive cultural issues. It's the outrage candy that the chaos merchants on the right keep shoving down our throats while they're robbing us blind, while they're literally stealing food off our kitchen table. How do we use this, what we've been talking about to point out the fact that they really are kicking people on the street, homeless people, while they're down. They're making up stuff about teachers in classrooms. They're attacking families and family decisions that, look, I don't have answers to. And government sure as shouldn't have an answer to. These are the people who tell me government out of our lives, but they don't have problems delving into stuff that nobody should have access to. How do we move it back to, you should earn a living wage. You should have health security. You should have retirement security. You should have safe working conditions. You should demand respect and dignity in the workplace. These should be absolutes. How do we move back from all this culture war nonsense and start talking about, hey, how do we leave a better place for our kids and a future that they can raise a family on?
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's one of our biggest priorities. And it's a tough balancing act for us too down here. We have members, frankly, all across the political spectrum. So we, try to stay away from those kind of divisive issues and really focus on, we call them kitchen table issues. A lot of the things you mentioned, am I earning a good wage to support a family sustaining wage? Can I support myself and my family? Are my kids getting a good education? Forget all the controversial stuff. Are they getting a good education? Do I have health care? Can I afford, good health care or health insurance for me and my family? That's the kind of things that we focus on is changing the conversation and telling our members, focus on those things, focus on the issues that impact your day-to-day lives, your quality of life, listen to those candidates and support those candidates. If they support, worker issues, we support them.
No, it's absolutely, it's something that's a must. And I don't know if it's social media that's gotten us moved in this direction. I don't know if it's the right-wing outrage machine and the power of the corporate media. But at some point, the labor movement has to be the voice of the working class and has to get out there and say, and remind us what is. I spent a little time, as I talked about earlier, looking at some old labor contracts. back from the late 1970s, early 80s, and the wages that they earned back then, shocking. I'll be honest, shocking. Warehouse workers, making $35 an hour in today's money back in 1979. And yet, Amazon's touting, hey, we pay 15 to 17. I'm sorry, where's the other half? Who's pocketing the other half? And we know who's pocketing it. It's up in space somewhere in a big boat somewhere where Jeff Bezos is running around on. And the thing is most people don't even know it. Most people think, wow, it wasn't that great back then. No, wages were much better in the past. It's just been extracted from us.
It has. And again, I mean, we're one of those states where our minimum wage is still $7.25. And one of the things we've tried to focus on is changing, I mentioned changing the conversation, but changing that conversation from, enough about the minimum wage. Let's focus on a living wage. Let's focus on Tennesseans being able to earn enough, again, to support themselves and their families and live a comfortable life without having to worry about making ends meet paycheck to paycheck with a dismal minimum wage.
Yeah. No, I like Dean Baker. I don't know if you saw Dean Baker's piece. He said had minimum wage kept up with productivity from the late 60s till today, it'd be $27 an hour. And he's not wrong. Had it kept up with productivity from the end of World War II all the way till now, minimum wage would be $27 an hour. And you go, hold on, where'd that other $20 go? Who pocketed that? Oh yeah, the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization that we created through our sacrifice and our struggle and our lower standard of living. Yay, thank you, good for us, pat on the back for us. Because we did it. We did it. But Alyssa, I appreciate the time and the info. I hope you'll come back and share some more. And good on you guys for fighting the good fight there in Tennessee, even though I got to tell you, your state's kind of crazy too.
You're not telling me something I don't already know, but thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Great stuff. Love to talk with you. Alyssa Hanson, Communications and Political Director there at the Tennessee Afl-Cio Labor Council. Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, do that. Email. Also, if you missed any of the program, podcast, make sure you grab that at thericksmithshow.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people on the talk. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1914, the bloody anniversary of the Ludlow Massacre. 11,000 miners had gone on strike against the Colorado Fuel and Iron Corporation, owned by one of the wealthiest men in the world, John D. Rockefeller. The strikers wanted recognition of the United Mine Workers of America as their union, increased wages, improved safety, and an 8-hour workday. The miners lived in company towns, where they had to shop in the company stores despite their high prices and had to visit company doctors. The strikers wanted an end to this repressive practice. During the strike, the workers and their families were evicted from the company houses. The evicted miners moved into tent camps on land leased by the UMWA. The bitter strike raged on, and on the morning after miners celebrated Orthodox Easter, National Guardsmen paid by the company approached the camp at Ludlow. Some drove up in an armored car mounted with a machine gun. Its nickname was the Death Special. At 10 a.m., they began shooting indiscriminately into the tents. That night, some guardsmen snuck down to the tents armed with kerosene. They lit the tents on fire. 2 women and 11 children were hiding in a dugout hole beneath one tent to avoid the flying bullets. They were burnt to death. In all, between 19 and 25 men, women, and children were murdered. Despite national outrage, neither Rockefeller nor any of the shooters were ever held accountable. 2 years later, the UMWA purchased the Ludlow site for commemoration. In 2008, it became a National Historic Landmark. Singer-songwriter Woody Guthrie wrote this tribute to the martyred miners and their families.
So afraid you'd kill our children, dug us a cave that's 7 foot deep, carried our young ones and a pregnant woman down inside.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, thericksmithshow.com. Questions, comments, something on your mind, email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. So, South Carolina, I'm sure a bunch of crazy people down in South Carolina not happy as the highest court in the land today said, sorry, we're going to temporarily block your firing squad. Evidently, they were set to have a firing squad execution. That evidently on hold. I'm not going to say it isn't going to happen. It's on hold. It would have been the first ever. Could have been the first ever firing squad to murder somebody. And look, I've always been very clear about my stance on capital punishment. I understand vigilante justice. I understand if someone kills your child and you go for revenge. I get that. Completely understand. And if I'm on the jury, I might not convict. I don't condone state-sponsored murder for a bunch of reasons. One of them being our system is badly broken, and it's usually poor people and people of color who are the ones executed. You very rarely see a rich guy get executed. And I know there are some people who say, well, we should go after those bankers. Yeah, I'm still against capital punishment. I would rather them live a very long life locked in a box. I know that's cruel and unusual. Yeah, so is murdering somebody, but it is what it is. Trump's Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, came out and was fairly interesting. Had a very interesting comment. He was against the federal judge in Florida who struck down the mask mandate. And I thought that was interesting. He said it probably is because of animus against Biden, and you go, yeah, duh, you think? Because it's certainly not on the law. Now the CDC has asked the Justice Department to go and appeal it to the federal courts. I think they have to. Although if I were making the decision, I don't know that I would. I mean, you're only asking for a short period of time. I know the precedence that this sets in case we have to go back and do it again, that if this is the last thing, it's a higher hurdle to do it again if we need to. I kind of get that. But politically, looking at this, moving the tea leaves around, at this point, if you're not smart enough to go, I'm going to get on a plane and I'm going to sit next to a guy who's coughing and hacking. I think maybe I think airlines should go, hey, we should have a mask section. If you want to wear a mask, you sit with people who do. If you don't, you sit with people who don't. Maybe we should do some of that. But this idea that we're gonna now, we've lifted it and now gonna reimpose it, I think it's just gonna make it much more difficult on the workers. Because I'll tell you, I have the stories I've heard from these flight attendants and the stories that I've heard from people who've tried to enforce these mandates on crazy people. I wouldn't want to, man, I wouldn't do that job. I couldn't do that job. Just dealing with, I don't know how people do it. I guess desperation. I guess that's what it is. You need the money that bad that you're willing to put up with Karen and Ken or, whatever we're calling the male version of Karen. I don't know how they do it. But yeah, we'll see if the DOJ is going to do it. Because originally they said they would seek to appeal it if the CDC wanted them to. They haven't given an official statement yet, but I assume they will. And look, I guess it was only till the end of the month, the beginning of May. So seems like a short period of time. I'd be stepping back from it, going, you know what? If at this point you haven't figured it out, if at this point you're not smart enough to do it, in that environment, you good luck. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just my thought process and how my mind works and all this. We used to be a country that believed in personal responsibility. We used to be that country. Sadly, I don't think we are anymore. We're a party of two. We've got a party of 2-year-olds, and they're all throwing their tantrums. Just look around. Look at the state of Tennessee. How crazy is that? Love to hear your thoughts. Email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, make sure you grab the podcast at our website, thericksmithshow.com, or wherever you get your podcasts, from iTunes to iHeart, Podbean, Stitcher, everywhere in between. Always there, always available. Share it with your friends. Also, make sure you follow us on social media. Thanks for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.